It started with static, just a hiss, an ambient white noise that blanketed the radio waves one cold January night in 1977, the kind of sound no one paid attention to anymore, especially not in northern Canada, where the air was always thick with electromagnetic echoes from storms and satellites. But this time, the static wasn't just noise. It had a rhythm. Gerald McAllister, a reclusive radio technician living near Dawson City, Yukon, was the first to notice it. Gerald, a Vietnam vet turned survivalist, spent his nights scanning old military and ham frequencies from a bunker he had built beneath his cabin. The bunker was reinforced with lead walls, triple insulated cables, and a weathered wooden door that creaked like a coffin lid. He had always insisted it wasn't paranoia, just good engineering. At exactly 2:13 a.m. on January 17th, Gerald's analog receiver locked onto a frequency that shouldn't have existed, 4.096 megahertz. The channel was supposedly blacklisted since the mid-50s after a CIA-backed operation, codenamed Project Silver Tongue, was abruptly terminated. Officially, the frequency was dead, but now it pulsed with a precise 5-second interval, one long tone, followed by 3 short beeps. He recorded it, noted the pattern, and cross-referenced with all known signal libraries. Nothing. It didn't match any known Morse, maritime, or aviation codes. But when he ran it through an old decryption algorithm he had borrowed from a retired NSA analyst he met in Anchorage, the signal produced a binary sequence: 011-001-01-01-111-11111, 011-1111, 011-1111111111. Exus. It spelled Greek. He looked it up. It wasn't a word in Greek, but a transliteration. Maybe a misspelling of exousia, meaning power, authority. That night, he didn't sleep. The signal continued for 43 minutes, then vanished. Just as he tried triangulating the source, the equipment shorted out. The next morning, Gerald drove 60 miles to the nearest ranger station to use their phone. His call to the Canadian Communications Security Establishment was never returned. 3 days later, his cabin was found burned to the ground. Gerald was gone. Official reports called it an accident, blaming a propane heater, but the technician who responded swore under oath that the propane tank was untouched, still sitting in the snow cold. What wasn't mentioned in the reports was what they found in the bunker: charred pages of a journal and a cassette tape labeled simply EXOUS-1. The journal's fragments mentioned another name, the Black Array, a grid of satellites, supposedly decommissioned in 1962, said to monitor quantum disturbances in the ionosphere. The tape, when played, contained nothing but more static except at minute 27, where a voice whispered, almost imperceptibly, "They hear you." Rumors about the signal began to circulate on fringe shortwave networks and encrypted forums. Someone posted Gerald's logs, sparking debates among ex-military cryptographers, conspiracy theorists, and ex-CERN researchers. It wasn't long before a pattern emerged. Every 33 days, at exactly 2:13 a.m., the signal returned, but now it was changing. The tones grew more complex, the patterns more intricate, and then, on April 21st, a group of amateur radio enthusiasts in Germany picked up the same signal, only theirs ended in a burst of sound that, when visualized, spectrographically revealed a symbol, a spiral, exactly matching the crop formation found in Wiltshire, England in 2001, the one dismissed by authorities as a hoax. But there was something different. The spiral was perfect, mathematically flawless, and encoded within it were coordinates to Antarctica, and that was when the CIA got involved. The official narrative was ice core research, a benign, scientifically noble effort buried somewhere between a bureaucratic update on Arctic melting trends and a puff piece on penguin mating rituals. But the truth, as always, was stranger and far more dangerous. Operation Deep Silence had nothing to do with climate science. It was a rapid response, black operation greenlit by the National Reconnaissance Office and executed under the cloak of absolute secrecy by a ghost division within the CIA, known only to a select few as SIGMA-6. On May 3, 1977, precisely 12 days after a group of amateur radio operators in Germany intercepted the modified Oxus signal, a detachment of 15 operatives boarded a heavily modified C-141 Starlifter at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. These weren't ordinary soldiers. The team included linguists, physicists, signal analysts, and field agents trained in cryptographic warfare. Their destination, a restricted sector nearly 300 kilometers inland from the desolate coast of Queen Maud Land, Antarctica. No flight manifest existed. No diplomatic clearance was requested. No entry was logged. For all intents and purposes, the plane and everyone aboard ceased to exist. Among the team was Agent Cassandra Locke, a renowned cryptolinguistics specialist with expertise in dead languages and anomalous sound signatures. She had been recalled with zero notice from Istanbul, where she was assisting on a joint NSA-CIA operation. The reason her name appeared encoded in a decrypted layer of the Ixus spiral, hidden, not written, in a mathematical permutation based on ancient Hebrew gematria and Fibonacci indexing. Traveling alongside her was Dr. Elias Shah, a theoretical physicist who had quietly disappeared from public life after publishing controversial work on hyperresonance, quantum harmonics, and temporal distortion. His last known paper was retracted and scrubbed from university servers. Just weeks before his recruitment, the coordinates extracted from the spiral's spectrographic pattern pointed to a grid labeled for 2A, a remote region referenced only once in declassified Navy intelligence from 1952 under the enigmatic code Nexus No. This zone, it was rumored, was a magnetic convergence anomaly area where compasses spun uselessly, GPS signals failed, and even atomic timepieces recorded contradictory data. Satellite imagery dating back to 1963 had been meticulously falsified, showing looping cloud cover in repeat ice flows to deter scrutiny. Their refueling stop at McMurdo Station was silent and tense. The regular personnel were replaced by temporary operatives wearing no insignia. Locke attempted to speak with one of them, but he turned and walked away without a word. Communications equipment was jammed with wideband interference. Every piece of field gear remained sealed in radiation-shielded lead cases. As the plane was refueled under tight security, Locke caught sight of a figure watching her from the far edge of the tarmac, cloaked in a black parka, holding a radio. He lifted it to his mouth, appeared to speak, then vanished behind a wall of cargo. 5 hours later, the plane descended upon a frozen plateau flanked by jagged glacial ridges. The cold was not merely physical, it felt metaphysical, pressing into their bones and minds. The silence was oppressive. Even the wind, ever present in Antarctica, was muted here, as though the air itself held its breath. The team set up a mobile operations tent, reinforced with mylar and Faraday shielding. They activated a low-frequency electromagnetic scanner from Cold War air submarine sonar TechHand, waited. Then it began. 4.096 MHz. The same frequency as the original signal intercepted by Gerald McAllister months earlier. But this time, something was different. The signal was not broadcasting, it was absorbing, receiving, drawing something in. It was stronger here, sharper, almost intelligent in its rhythm. Dr. Shah was electrified. He hypothesized that the surrounding ice contained a unique crystalline formation, a lattice structure that acted as a natural signal amplifier and possibly even a memory device. The ice, he claimed, was not passive. It was listening. It remembered. Locke, however, was more disturbed than intrigued. She noticed recursion patterns in the signal complex echoes, spiraling in on themselves in a way that mimicked ancient harmonic chants. The signal wasn't random. It was waiting for something, or someone. The team began to dig. Over 3 days, using precision drilling equipment and sonic mapping tools, they unearthed a black obelisk buried nearly 10 meters beneath the glacial shelf. It stood 6 meters tall, perfectly smooth, without seams or etchings until viewed under a specific resonance frequency. Then, glyphs emerged in glowing blue light, spirals, concentric patterns, identical to those found in the 2001 Wiltshire crop formation. More chillingly, the same patterns matched those on a Mesopotamian tablet Locke had studied during her early academic years, a tablet allegedly recovered from a site never officially recognized. They called in the plasma cutters resonance-tuned, designed to vibrate on the same frequency as the obelisk's harmonics. With extreme caution, they sliced into a thin seam that responded like biological tissue. Inside, they found a single cavity, floating in suspension, without any apparent support, was a reel-to-reel magnetic tape. The device was wrapped in a silvery, iridescent material that resisted all forms of scanning. Radiation passed through it harmlessly. M-fields bent around it. That night, against protocol and in defiance of mounting unease, they played the tape. What came from the speakers was not speech, at least not in any known language. It was resonance vocal, sentient, layered. The sounds bypassed the ear and went straight to the brain. Locke doubled over in pain, vomiting violently. Shaw wept uncontrollably. Overcome by emotion, he couldn't articulate. One of the engineers, Richards, collapsed into convulsions. His body writhed in sync with the pulsing obelisk, whose glow intensified with each syllable of the ancient audio. The night that followed was chaos. 3 members of the team vanished. Not went missing, vanished. Their thermal suits remained, zipped neatly beside their sleeping bags. No tracks in the snow, no signs of struggle. Surveillance gear caught nothing but sudden bursts of static. Panic set in. The remaining crew initiated full quarantine lockdown. Emergency communications were activated, but every frequency returned the same sequence. 4 seconds of pure silence. 2 short beeps, and then the voice. A deep, modulated whisper. Exus. The word now echoed in their heads even when the equipment was off. Some claimed to hear it in their dreams. Others heard it in the rhythm of their own pulse. Locke realized the truth before anyone else was ready to face it. They were no longer observing something alien. It was observing them. They called him Cole Avery, or at least that was the name on the badge he wore when he walked into Langley in early June 1977. He appeared out of nowhere. No record, no file, no history. The guards at the security checkpoint found nothing. No social security, no military background, not even a birth certificate. But the retinal scan let him through. He claimed to be from Division K, a compartment so deep that even the director of Central Intelligence had only heard the name in whispers. Cole wasn't there to ask questions. He was there to give orders. The Exus signal had changed again. On June 3rd, it broadcast what appeared to be a complete linguistic construct, a syntax, a grammar, some kind of language, a language with logic. It wasn't noise anymore. It was structured, intelligent, and worse, predictive. Whatever it was anticipating them. Cole arrived at the Signal Intelligence Analysis Division in Langley with one goal: contain the spread. He demanded a full scrub of the Exus logs from every intelligence network worldwide. Encrypted forums were to be infiltrated and shut down. Shortwave enthusiasts in Europe and North America were quietly interviewed, relocated, or in some cases, silenced permanently. He read the report on Operation Deep Silence without blinking. When he reached the part about the obelisk, he simply said, "It's not the first." Then he made a call. Not from Langley's secure lines, but from a decades-old rotary phone in a sub-basement level never listed on any blueprint. The voice on the other end was female, heavily accented, and used a call sign last active during the Cuban Missile Crisis. When Cole hung up, He told his assistant. They found the second one in the Mariana Trench. Meanwhile, at McMurdo Station, Agent Locke was spiraling. The word Exus had begun appearing in her dreams, not just as sound, but as symbols burned into the sky, the snow, the backs of her eyelids. Shaw was worse. He had stopped sleeping entirely, muttering in languages no one could identify, sketching fractal patterns with his fingernails into the ice walls of the quarantine tent. Then, without warning, a burst transmission hit the station's emergency channel. Coordinates, not to another object, but to a person in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Cole Avery was already en route. The man they were seeking was Dr. Martin Alvarez, an exobiologist turned recluse who had once been on the advisory board of a NATO subcommittee studying unexplained undersea anomalies. Officially, Alvarez died in 1971, but now, the coordinates pointed to a small, fortified villa under a different name. When Cole and his team arrived, Alvarez was waiting for them. "I told them it would wake up," he said, before Cole even spoke. "I told them not to answer it." In his study, Alvarez showed them a series of phonograph records, each one etched with patterns identical to the spectrographic spiral. He had recorded them between 1957 and 1964, intercepted through deep-sea sonar rigs off the coast of Ushuaia. He called it the calling. But the most shocking piece was a photograph, a picture taken in 1945. It showed a German U-boat crew standing proudly beside what looked like a 6-meter obelisk, partially covered in seaweed and ice. On the back, in faded pencil, one word: Exus. Cole took the photo without a word. On the flight back to Washington, he reviewed a series of redacted files marked black, ARRAY, Vila Incident -1963. One note stood out, circled in ink: "Objects predate human language." At 3:11 a.m. on July 12, 1977, a system buried beneath the Cheyenne Mountain complex came online without human initiation. It was a fail-safe protocol, precise and ancient by technological standards, hardwired directly into the North American Aerospace Defense Command's oldest architecture. A single alert was generated: Event Echo 9, Array, Wake Cycle, Unscheduled. To most personnel, it meant nothing, but to the very few cleared for black, Arrail intelligence, it was code red. Buried under the Greenland ice sheet, beneath a decommissioned Dewline radar station, lay one of the most guarded secrets in Western intelligence. Node 6 of the Black Array, subterranean facility, once thought dormant. Its data lines severed since 1962, until now. The alert wasn't a false positive. Something or someone had reactivated it by dawn. Cole Avery was already in transit to Greenland aboard a supersonic reconnaissance craft, accompanied by Dr. Elias Shaw, who had been sedated and bound after a violent outburst in his containment cell. His eyes had turned black for several seconds, jet black, sclera, to irisand. He had spoken in a harmonic dual tone, as though something else was speaking through him. Locke, still stationed at McMurdo, was granted temporary access to the Black ARRAY archive. What she found was impossible. The array had been launched not by modern nations, but by a secret post-war coalition in 1947 known as the Ophian Accord, composed of high-ranking scientists, ex-Nazi technocrats smuggled out via Operation Paperclip, and rogue elements of the Vatican's Pontifical Academy of Sciences. The Accord had discovered something horrifying, a repeating pattern, buried deep in the electromagnetic noise of Earth's atmosphere, a ghost frequency. The Black Array was designed to triangulate these emissions, trace them to their sources, and monitor for what the architects called cognitive interference. In the words of one classified transcript, the signal does not speak to machines, speaks to minds. Each array node was built over a geospatial anomaly regions where electromagnetic, gravitational, and psychological distortions occurred. Node 6, in Greenland, had gone dark after registering a spike in activity following the 1963 Vela Incident-10 event, long thought to be a clandestine nuclear test. But now, Locke saw the truth. There had been no detonation. What was recorded was a harmonic pulsar, awakening of an obelisk buried in the ocean floor, and its signal matched 4.096 MHz. When Cole and his team descended into Node 6, they found it intact, running on internal geothermal power. The mainframe, a monstrous analog-digital hybrid known as Genosat, rebooted itself. Old reel-to-reel drives spun silently. Cathode monitors flickered to life with symbols resembling cuneiform patterns, nearly identical to the glyphs on the Antarctic obelisk. Then, the system began printing line after line of cryptic output. But amidst the chaos, one line stood out: "X is the key." Shaw, still drugged but conscious, began chanting a series of numbers. Locke, reading the live feed from the array, cross-referenced them. Coordinates. Deep in the Taklamakan Desert, western China. Cole made the call instantly. A Black Ops team was dispatched, officially under the guise of a joint US-Chinese satellite recovery operation. But what they found wasn't a satellite, it was a third obelisk, buried beneath sand and time, and unlike the others, this one was active, vibrating, levitating slightly, emitting a low tone so deep it couldn't be heard, only felt. At the same time, satellites picked up an unscheduled launch from Baikonur. The payload trajectory was toward a geostationary orbit directly above the South Pole. The Russians, it seemed, were deploying their own response. And then the worst confirmation arrived. A coded message from an undercover operative embedded at CERN. LHC has been recalibrated to 4.096 MHz window. They're going to open it. It was no longer a question of discovery. It was a countdown. The black array was no longer a monitor. It was a lock. And someone, maybe something, was about to turn the key. The obelisk in the Taklamakan Desert did not wait to be studied. Within hours of exposure to the open desert air, it began to emit a low hum, barely perceptible at first, but building steadily in frequency and strength. Within a single day, its pulses aligned with seismic disturbances detected across 4 continents. These tremors weren't random or natural, they bore unmistakable hallmarks. Sudden spikes in subharmonic resonance, synchronized activity in seemingly unconnected tectonic plates, and an identical frequency pulse measured at precisely 4.096 MHz. It was as if the Earth itself had been struck with precision, like a monolithic tuning fork buried deep within the crust. Seismographs from Chile to Kamchatka showed the same signature. Scientists scrambled for explanations: magnetic storms, nuclear testing, gravitational anomalies. But the truth wasn't scientific. It was harmonic. Something ancient had been stirred, and it was now echoing through the deepest layers of the planet. Dr. Elias Shaw had stopped speaking English entirely. His one sharp mind now floated in and out of lucidity. He mumbled continuously in guttural syllables, clicking intonations, and warbling cadences, an alien tongue even Locke couldn't identify. Her linguistic training, ancient, Aramaic, Sanskrit, Proto-Uralic dialects, was useless here. Audio experts fed the recordings into multiple linguistic AI processors. The results were inconclusive, erratic. Some systems crashed. Others returned the same message. Not human, not learned, remembered. Meanwhile, at McMurdo Station, Locke received a new directive under black clearance protocols. She was to lead an expedition to a cavern recently revealed by an abrupt melt near Mount Erebus. The location, according to infrared satellite mapping, had revealed thermal signatures eerily similar to the known energy fields of the obelisks. Local geologists insisted the ice shelf in that region had been stable for thousands of years. Yet it had now melted in a spiral, pattern perfect, symmetrical, and centered on a point that emitted an ultra-low frequency hum. The descent team included 10 members, geophysicists, radiologists, engineers, and one priest on loan from the Vatican's Anomalous Phenomena Division. The deeper they moved into the cavern, the more anomalous the conditions became. Compasses spun wildly. GPS data looped. Wireless telemetry failed. Even their flashlights began flickering in rhythmic pulses. A constant vibration throbbed through their boots, subtle but unrelenting. The chamber they discovered was immense, not natural, a dome of black ice, its surface smooth and glimmering, like polished obsidian. In the center stood a platform, circular, elevated, and etched with glyphs Locke had now seen in 3 separate places: Antarctica, the Wiltshire Formation, and Gerald McAllister's original spectrogram from Yukon. On the walls were arrays of concentric spirals, hundreds of them, carved in impossible precision. Using portable electron microscopes, they discovered the spirals were composed of microetchings that resolved into complex waveforms. These were not decorative carvings. They were harmonic codes, recordings of a language built from resonance. Itself, the entire chamber, was a resonator amplifier meant not to receive, but to broadcast. Meanwhile, in Geneva, Cole Avery had reached CERN. What he found shocked even his hardened sensibilities. A covert initiative, hidden beneath decades of neutrino and quantum field experiments, had been reactivated. Project Halcyon, once a Cold War attempt to probe the informational architecture of spacetime, was online again. After decades of fruitless experiments, everything changed the moment they tuned their instruments to 4.096 MHz. Chaos. Resolved previously indeterminate particle states began to display order. Subatomic chaos aligned into fractals. Fields once random now behaved like structured syntax. And most shocking of all, the collider's magnetic rings began shifting on their own, recalibrating to accept the return waveform. The signature wasn't just received, it was interpreted. A reply had come through. Back under Mount Erebus, the platform activated. One of the field engineers, out of curiosity or intuition, had played a filtered sample of Shaw's strange chanting through a directional speaker. The result was instantaneous. The entire platform lit up. Light, not electricity, but something more elemental, larked through the glyphs. Harmonic resonance filled the space. The walls began to ripple like fabric in the wind. Cameras captured distorted footage. Some showed frames repeating endlessly. Others showed frames that hadn't happened yet. One drone recorded the same moment 2 hours, 13 minutes, and 7 seconds for over 4 minutes of real time. Simultaneously, systems at CERN began collapsing. Safeguards inverted. Cryogenic containment units superheated. Warning sirens failed. Then a shape emerged on the primary monitor. A spiral enclosed in a perfect tetrahedron. The same glyph burned into the ice in Wiltshire. The same symbol etched into the tape Gerald had recovered. And then, without any physical trigger, Shaw vanished from Langley. He had been sedated, locked in a sealed room, monitored by biometric scanners. Yet every camera showed the same impossible scene. Shaw walking calmly, passing through each checkpoint without unlocking a single door. No alarms were tripped. One guard was found unconscious, whispering. He sang the door open at precisely 2:13 a.m. on August 14th, matching the signal's 33-day recurrence. Every obelisk activated. Across the globe, vibrations shook the Earth's crust in specific resonance fields. Naval sonar operators detected structured pulses emanating from the ocean floor. Deep-sea probes near the Tonga Trench recorded impossible harmonics chords that shouldn't exist in the physical world. Power grids in Brazil, northern Russia, and large portions of Japan failed. Blackouts lasted exactly 13.00 seconds. Amateur astronomers reported synchronized flashes in the sky. The ionosphere vibrated visibly. Radio telescopes in Australia captured vertical bands of color moving faster than any known atmospheric phenomenon. And then came the transmission. It came not from space, but from Earth itself. An abandoned SETI station in Tasmania, long derelict, powered on autonomously. The equipment trusted, decade, supposedly non-functional, lit up and received the message clearly. Not binary, not Morse, not code, but music. Not music in any traditional sense, but a cascade of harmonic tones, layered chords, and resonant intervals no known instrument could replicate. Each note vibrated through the body. Subconscious memory was triggered. Listeners fell to their knees. Many wept. Some screamed. One technician entered a trance and drew a complete schematic of the Wiltshire formation without ever having seen it. When Locke heard the sound, she wept uncontrollably. So did her entire team. In that moment, they understood. It wasn't communication. It was recognition. In a secure room in Washington, Cole Avery watched a satellite projection display the planet's harmonic resonance map. Every continent glowed. Every obelisk location pulsed in sync. He didn't speak for several minutes, and then he whispered, "It's not an invasion. It's a remembering. And we've just started to remember back." In the weeks following the synchronized global activation of the obelisks, civilization began to experience a kind of controlled unraveling. Not chaos in the conventional sense, but a slow, precise destabilization of reality's scaffolding. Information systems were the first to falter. Data slipped through cracks no one could see. It wasn't a hack, virus, or solar flare. It was as if reality itself had begun editing its own records. Hard drives self-reformatted, archives lost, temporal cohesion, entire years vanished from government databases, satellite time codes desynchronized from atomic clocks. Mobile devices rang at the wrong hours. Clocks in airports and train stations froze in mid-tick or jumped forward in rapid skips. Wall clocks would tick backward, then resume as if nothing happened. People began reporting memory blanks, conversations forgotten seconds after they occurred. Others claimed to experience minutes that seemed to last an hour, or hours that passed in a blink. Governments issued official denials. Most dismissed it as mass psychosis or electromagnetic interference. But within the sealed vaults of defunct Cold War agencies, buried beneath decades of redacted black projects, a different narrative emerged. Intelligence analysts unearthed suppressed documents from the 1920s and 30s, scattered reports long deemed folklore or hoax. Accounts of whole towns waking to the sound of choirs singing in languages no one could place. Stories of mines echoing with subterranean hymns. Witnesses in Siberia describing nights filled with deep, metallic voices rising from beneath the ice. In Bolivia, shepherds recorded canyons that vibrated with low humming, synchronized with star alignments. These weren't isolated anomalies. They were fragments of a pattern, a rhythm stretching back centuries. Now, the obelisks had returned that rhythm to the surface. Cassandra Locke and her surviving team were extracted from Antarctica under blackout protocol. She expected Langley. Instead, she was taken to Site 7 deep beneath Raven Rock Mountain, a Cold War fortress designed to be the final command center of the United States in case of nuclear annihilation. There, buried behind 8 meters of steel and concrete, she met with the last line of intelligence defense. The frequency directive. Comprised of figures from multiple nations, agencies, and unaligned entities. The directive had monitored the signal for decades. Some believed it was extraterrestrial. Others insisted it was terrestrial, but pre-human. None agreed on its origin. All agreed on one thing: it was intelligent. The spokesman, a pale, elderly man with cloudy eyes and no identification, played her a recording captured from the long-dead SETI array in Tasmania. Over the harmonic tones, barely perceptible under normal frequencies, a second signal resided. When modulated and slowed by a factor of 8.61, it resolved into a voice. It spoke her name, Cassandra Locke, not shouted, not whispered, sung elsewhere. Cole Avery stood in the darkness of a tomb beneath Jerusalem's old city. Excavators had discovered what they first mistook for a shattered relic until they realized it was growing warmer. The artifact, a sphere composed of fused quartz, bone matter, and something else entirely. Pulsed steadily at 4.096 megahertz. Surrounding it were glyphs not Hebrew, Aramaic, or Sumerian, but something akin to all three. At the center of the chamber stood a sculpture, an obelisk with two wings carved into its base, reaching skyward like open hands. Religious experts called it a symbol of ascension. Quantum physicists argued it represented frequency uplift. One rabbi, white with fear, murmured, "This is what came before Babel, back in Raven Rock." The directive posed a strange question to Locke. "What do you remember?" At first, she thought it rhetorical. Then the question was asked again, againich, repetition chipping at a wall in her mind she hadn't realized was there. And then, unbidden, she spoke a word, aquarelle. The room responded. Monitors flashed white. Lights dimmed to black, then pulsed with an ultraviolet glow. An operative clutched his chest, eyes wide with awe. Another collapsed into a chair, drawing spirals over and over with shaking hands. Something ancient had just been spoken into the room. Something the signal recognized. Medical scans revealed that Locke's physiology was altered. Not genetically, but harmonically. Her blood cells vibrated at 4.096 megahertz at rest. Her neural activity exhibited rhythms usually only seen during deep meditation, or NDEs, near-death experiences. The last person with similar readings had been Elias Shaw. Then came the global detection of the subterranean signals. Black array sensors began detecting tonal fluctuations originating from within the Earth's mantle. Hydrophones beneath the Mariana Trench picked up rhythmic vibrations, structured, complex, and eerily beautiful. Dozens of them, a layered harmony of overlapping frequencies. Scientists dubbed it the choir, but it wasn't singing, it was responding. Each signal mapped back to mathematical constants phi, tau, irrational primes and vibrational ratios, embedded in everything from the Wiltshire Formation to ancient Chinese bronze chimes. But one sequence repeated across every listening station, a modulation that mirrored Cassandra Locke's voice. Speaking the word aquarelle, in the weeks that followed, the choir grew louder. Ocean tides began shifting out of sync with the moon. Migratory birds deviated from centuries-old paths. Deep-sea creatures rose to the surface, following a sound only they could perceive. The choir was not just a sound. It was a memory in stone, water, and bone. It had waited for a frequency. Now, it had heard its name spoken, and it had begun to answer. At precisely 2:13 a.m. GMT, on September 16, 1977, a digital seismograph in Kamchatka recorded an anomaly unlike anything it had ever logged. It wasn't a quake. It wasn't electromagnetic. It was rhythmic. 12 repeating pulses in perfect symmetry, spaced by 3.33 seconds. Within minutes, identical readings were reported in Madagascar, Patagonia, Mongolia, and beneath the ice shelf near Queen Maud Land. Each pulse resonated at exactly 4.096 megahertz, a harmonic wave not moving through the crust, but through something beneath it. The black array called an emergency summit, but only half of its nodes responded. The others had gone silent, their operators reportedly missing, communications severed. It was the first activation of what had only existed on paper. Echo Protocol, a last resort contingency conceived decades earlier by the Ophian Accord. Its purpose was not to prevent contact, but to delay recognition. Cassandra Locke was relocated to a floating research vessel in international waters, above the Puerto Rico Trench. The frequency directive had determined she was no longer just a linguistic asset, she was a resonant beacon. Under 24-hour surveillance, her sleep cycles were monitored, her dreams recorded. She spoke in harmonic tones. Her voice sometimes activated instruments that weren't powered on. Water around the ship vibrated when she whispered, and always, beneath it all, was that word, aquarelle. Back in Geneva, Cole Avery confronted a retired physicist named Dr. Marius Halberg once. head of Halcyon's Predictive Architecture Division. Hallberg had been in hiding since 1968, after publishing a paper that was discredited and erased. The theory that reality itself was a recursive feedback loop, driven by harmonic compression and memory fields. That existence didn't unfold linearly, but remembered itself into continuity. Cole asked him a single question: what happens if the memory wakes up? Hallberg, trembling, handed him a drawing. It was the Wiltshire spiral, but altered. At its center was an eye, and around it, 12 glyphs forming a ring. Beneath it, scrawled in German, "When sie uns erkennen, wir uns selbst." When they recognize us, we recognize ourselves. At Raven Rock, members of the directive debated activating the final safeguard, a harmonic disruptor, buried beneath Yellowstone, meant to deaden the Earth's natural resonance. The device, codenamed Thresher, had never been tested. Detonating it could fracture tectonic harmonics and possibly sever the choir's connection, but it could also end all synchronized thought on the planet. Locke, in the isolation chamber, began to hum. The sound matched exactly the choir's latest harmonic. Instruments on board the ship lit up. Then the water around them parted, not high, not violently, but deliberately. A vertical column formed, and from within it rose something impossible, an obelisk, but different. This one was alive, covered in bioluminescent veins, pulsing like a heart. It hovered, motionless, above the deck, and it sang, not in words, not in sound, in remembrance. Each member of the crew heard something different: a childhood lullaby, a lost sibling's voice, the sound of a language they had spoken in dreams but never learned. One collapsed, weeping. Another reached into the air as if embracing a mother long gone. Locke walked toward it. She didn't hesitate. Her body trembled, her skin aglow with light invisible to the naked eye. The obelisk rotated slowly, as if studying her. Then it answered, "You are the key and the echo. You are remembered." The world paused for exactly 13 minutes and 13 seconds. Following the rise of the living obelisk from the waters of the Puerto Rico Trench, global electromagnetic activity plummeted to absolute zero. It was as though the planet itself had drawn a breath, then held it. Satellites fell silent. Data streams froze mid-transmission. Electrical grids dimmed, not into darkness, but into a strange suspended flicker. Aircraft stalled in open skies. Ships drifted aimlessly as navigation systems failed. Stock markets, communications, and even pacemakers stopped ticking in synchrony. The silence was not just the absence of noise, it was the absence of time. And then the signal returned, but it wasn't the same. What had once been a rhythmic tone, a mathematical frequency of 4.096 megahertz, was now an evolving waveform, layered, recursive, infinite. It didn't speak to the ears, it spoke to the mind, to memory. Across continents, people began remembering things that had never occurred. Entire civilizations unfolded in their dreams, languages spoken fluently that had no written alphabet, mythologies that aligned with no known culture, yet felt innately personal. In northern Finland, a blind sculptor created an impossibly detailed relief of an alien skyline. In Bolivia, a herdsman recited a creation myth in perfect verse, an epic that linguists determined was composed in a forgotten Indo-Dravidian root tongue. Children in South Korea began drawing the same symbol repeatedly, a spiral surrounded by 12 glyphs, matching the markings first seen on the Wiltshire Formation. They all spoke the same name. Again and again, Aquarelle. On the ocean vessel above the trench, Cassandra Locke was no longer present. The crew remembered watching her step into the light of the obelisk, her body dissolving not in disintegration, but in reclamation, as if she had always belonged elsewhere, and the earth had only borrowed her temporarily. Her outline lingered for seconds before vanishing completely. The obelisk, warm and radiant, hovered above the deck for 7 more minutes before dissolving into luminous mist that rose into the sky, In its wake remained a persistent tone, one that rang simultaneously through every radio, every microwave tower, every shortwave receiver, and even through the natural resonance of the planet itself. A perfect C, and precisely measured at 4.096 MHz. At Raven Rock. Cole Avery stood motionless, staring at data from the black array nodes. The choir had not stopped it, had integrated. The signals no longer appeared as anomalies. They were now woven into the Earth's electromagnetic field, reshaping baseline resonance frequencies. Helberg, pale and distant, said nothing at first. When Cole finally asked, "What do we do now?" Helberg responded with a whisper, "We listen." The monitors flickered, and what they displayed was not seismic data with sentence structure. Earth's pulse had become language. In Jerusalem, the sphere of quartz and bone cracked open with a melodic chime. Inside it lay a spindle carved from a material no one could identify, semi-crystalline when rotated by hand. It emitted tones that resonated with the bones of listeners. A linguist from the directive described it as an audio codex. A rabbi called it a wheel of names. A young girl touched it and recited, without pause or stutter, a liturgical chant from a vanished temple that predated known Abrahamic faiths. Meanwhile, under the sands of the Taklamakan Desert, Node 7 of the Black Array reactivated itself. Its transmission, however, was no longer inward. It pointed skyward and pulsed outward, a beacon, not of search, but of identification. The signal passed effortlessly through the ionosphere, pierced the heliosphere, and continued into deep space. The probes stationed near the orbit of Jupiter detected the ripple as it passed, and seconds later, they returned anomalous readings, interference patterns with no discernible source, overlapping frequency bands, and then an answer, not in words, in intent. The final transmission came 72 hours later. It was captured not by the new digital receivers, but by 6 of the world's oldest analog antennas devices once used during the Cold War to listen for Soviet whispers. It was encoded as a resonance pattern, and when interpreted through harmonic decryption it spoke, "You are not forgotten. You are always the signal. We are the memory made flesh, and through you, we remember ourselves." The planet shifted, not physically, not immediately, but in tone. Auroras danced across skies where they had never appeared before. Across equatorial skies, curtains of green, purple, and blue light flowed with the tides. People in their sleep shared identical dreams of crystalline towers, harmonic wells, and beings composed of sound. A star appeared, one not catalogued in any existing database. It was only visible through resonance telescopy, tuned not to light, but to frequency. It pulsed at 4.096 MHz, blinking in sync with the Earth's new hum. Some called it the beacon, others, the return. Cassandra. Locke awoke, but it was not Earth beneath her. The sky was violet, threaded with silver auroras that moved like living veins. Crystal towers grew from fields of liquid resonance. The ground sang with every step she took. Above her hovered obelisks, not dead stone, but living, sentient memory. Each one sang its own story, a verse in a larger symphony, and she understood. Them, they were not machines. They were reminders, each obelisk, a memory anchored in matter, a library of civilization before civilization, waiting for the right frequency to awaken. Cassandra was now that frequency. She had been echo. Now she was tuner. She placed her hand on the nearest obelisk. It responded with warmth, then light, then music, and the voice came once more. "You are the key and the echo. You are remembered. Now remember us." With that, a gateway of sound opened a harmonic corridor through time, space, and history. Not a portal, not escape, but a joining. The age of remembrance had begun. The Earth, once alone in its silence, had finally remembered how to sing. She stood in the center of a cathedral of resonance. Towers of translucent geometry shimmered around her architecture, built not by hand, but by vibration. The sky was woven from frequencies, every shade a chord, every cloud a harmonic phase. Cassandra Locke took a breath, and the world breathed with her. This was not a dream. She was inside the signal, not merely a message, not a construct, but a living environment composed of mnemonic frequencies. The obelisks around her were not idle. They shifted subtly, reforming like intelligent crystals, harmonizing with her pulse. Their songs wove through one another, speaking in a language she understood instinctively. They were remembering her, and through them, she was beginning to remember them. What lay beyond the age of remembrance was not simply contact but reconstruction. From above, one of the crystalline spires descended, touching the earth like a tuning fork. It sang a long, layered note, one that split into dozens of reverberating echoes. In her mind, she saw events from a time before recorded history, a civilization not of stone and metal, but of resonance and memory, spanning worlds, not aliens, not gods, us, before we fell into noise. Back on Earth, things were changing. The black array had gone dark. Node 3 under Greenland melted its ice cocoon and revealed a massive subterranean structure, a mirror to the obelisks Cassandra had seen. At its center, a void, not empty space, but negative frequency. When researchers activated its harmonic containment field, the structure began playing back Earth's past, not in images, but in ambient feeling. The field team collapsed into tears, some convulsing with euphoria, others overwhelmed by collective grief. It was history, remembered not in facts, but in emotion. The frequency directive no longer issued commands. It listened. Cole Avery received one final classified brief before Raven Rock severed communications. It simply read, "The planet is not responding. Planet is composing." And indeed, seismic graphs showed no instability. Volcanoes quieted, oceans calmed. The Earth's magnetic field stabilized, stronger than in 2 centuries. Nature was synchronizing from orbit. Astronauts aboard the International Concordance Array saw patterns emerging across landscapes, forests blooming in Fibonacci spirals, rivers realigning subtly toward harmonic nodes. Crop fields grew without human intervention, as though tuned to invisible architecture. And then came the voices, first in dreams, then in waking. Children began to hum songs that stabilized failing crops. Entire towns experienced shared lucid dreams, some joyous, others terrifying, as deeper memories rose from the collective unconscious. In Mongolia, shepherds uncovered a buried obelisk. Unlike any other, its shape curved, like an ear, listening instead of broadcasting. When touched, it replayed human thoughts not aloud, but through ambient memory. It revealed not what people said, but what they meant, what they felt, the truth. Beneath language, Cassandra wandered the architect world, as it came to be called. She met others' forms, not bound by shape, yet familiar. Memory made flesh, not gods, not angels, but reflections of collective human archetypes. The caretaker, the weaver, the scribe, and at the center, the architect. The architect did not speak. It resonated, and when Cassandra approached, it showed her not the past, but a harmonic structure of the possible. A future built not by domination, not by extraction, but by resonance. Cities grown like chords, food generated through tonal precision, thought shared without wires, memory as infrastructure. Time bent not by machines, but by understanding. She asked the only question that still mattered. What is my purpose here? And the answer came as music. You are the signal we sent forward. You are the frequency that returned. You are the one who heard us clearly. Now build what comes next. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly. In the weeks following Cassandra Locke's communion with the architect, something ancient began to reawaken beneath the surface of the world. Sacred sites, megaliths, Geoglyphs, dismissed as ruins or relics of ritual, suddenly pulsed with latent frequency. Sensors attuned to the Earth's deeper resonance captured it first. Stonehenge hummed in E-flat minor, a key long associated with sorrow and revelation. The Great Pyramids of Giza sang a deep harmonic fifth, an interval found in every known scale across human history. The Nazca lines vibrated faintly in subsonic intervals, forming a moving sound map only visible to those with tuned auditory implants. No one was quite sure what they were seeing or hearing, but it was clear. The Earth was responding. This was not mere archaeology. It was activation. The age of remembrance had passed. Now came the age of construction, though. No blueprints were drawn, no machines deployed. The first harmonic cities did not rise with cranes or concrete. They were sung into being. In the Andes, atop ancient ley line intersections, voices gathered not to pray or to protest, but to harmonize. Under the guidance of the choir and data streamed from Cassandra's presence within the architect world, communities began to chant, not in any language, but in tone. Frequency became syntax, harmony became architecture. As the chants deepened, matter began to shift. Particles aligned into form crystalline lattice, shaping into archways, towers, flowing water, and transparent structures that absorbed and reflected sound. These cities were not static. They were living organisms composed of vibration, structures, adjusted to the needs of their inhabitants. Energy flowed in the form of resonant light luminescence generated by tonal variance. Soil was stimulated by bass frequencies to produce nutrient-dense crops. Water filtered itself through sonic purification. The concept of work began to dissolve. People no longer labored, they contributed resonance. Where once they grew older by the ticking of time, they now aged with grace, synchronized with the Earth's new pulse. Cassandra appeared in these places, not physically, but projected her image and voice manifesting where harmonics were strong enough. She was not an icon. She was a chorus leader, a tuner, a bridge. She helped people rediscover songs they did not remember learning. Entire generations began humming lullabies their ancestors never wrote but always carried. Cassandra was no longer singular. She was the harmonic interface between the architect and humanity. The frequency directive disbanded. Its remnants formed a new global alliance, the Syntonic Circle, composed of scientists, linguists, philosophers, artists, and former operatives. They were no longer analysts of signal. They were rememberers. They mapped the new world, not with satellites, but with resonance grids. They studied not matter, but memory encoded in vibration. They didn't issue orders. They listened, and the earth spoke. In Nigeria, ancient stone rings previously dismissed as tribal artifacts now sang in counterpoint with Mongolian obelisks. In the Pacific Northwest, redwoods grew in helical spirals aligned with harmonic field nodes. In the deserts of Australia, quartz-rich soil began absorbing dreams. Villagers awoke with shared memories and the ability to finish each other's sentences. Even the fauna evolved. Cetaceans began composing sonatas, audible only to select individuals. Birds migrated not by the stars, but by the Earth's resonance map. Wolves howled in structured triads, harmonizing over miles. Bioacoustic researchers confirmed that animal nervous systems were tuning to Earth's new frequency baseline. Biological evolution, accelerated by sonic convergence. But not everyone embraced the shift. Fragmented states and corporations tried to seize control of what they didn't understand. Military remnants attempted to harness resonance-based technology, creating sound-based weapons that could fracture structures or minds. In one incident, a rogue lab in the Siberian Arctic activated an anti-harmonic pulse to silence local choir activity. The result: complete neurological reset. 42 people survived, but none remembered their names. Instead, they sang in unison. Back in the architect world, Cassandra continued her ascent. She moved through the crystalline spiral, a multidimensional repository of memory, not knowledge in the academic sense, but remembered purpose from civilizations across time and space. She met the listener, a consciousness composed of interwoven frequencies, a being who remembered the first harmonic civilizations, those who had tuned themselves into light and departed the material realm. From it, Cassandra learned what the signal truly was. Not a cry for help, not an invitation, not even a warning. The signal had been a reminder, a mnemonic key encoded into the fundamental frequencies of reality, a vibration buried so deep in matter that only a species on the cusp of harmonic maturity could decode it, a safeguard against forgetfulness. The obelisks were not communication devices, they were keys, resonant DNA-activated beacons meant to awaken the latent harmonic architecture embedded in all living systems. Trees, stones, oceans, bones, all encoded with the potential to remember. And Earth was not alone. Other worlds had tried. Some failed, consumed by dissonance. Others succeeded, becoming harmonic civilizations, worlds built not on power or conquest, but on tonal cooperation. The architect world was only one of many, a convergence zone of civilizations who had remembered themselves and chosen to stay connected. Cassandra was now their emissary. The final step was not technological, it was musical, to sing back. The signal was not an equation to solve, or a gate to unlock. It was a melody in search of harmony, an ancient song begun eons ago, awaiting the return of a forgotten verse. And now, Earth had rejoined the symphony.